Thank you guys for coming out today. Appreciate you giving your time to listen to my Master's Action Research project. This project was part of the Master's program in Special Education through Campbellsville University. I'm now in my last phase of the Master's Action Research project. The MARP that I chose was Positive Outcomes of Inclusion in the Token Economy Reward System. Basically, I wanted to see what the Token Economy Reward System, which is a behavior management system, what it would do in an inclusive environment for students with learning disabilities or students listed as emotional behavior disabilities or OHI. And this is, like I said, this is the final phase of my Master's Action Research project. Slide. Alright, introduction here. The concept of inclusion can directly correlate with the use of the Token Economy Reward System. The common goal of all teachers is to create a positive structured environment for their students. With that being said, students with learning disabilities are included in the general education setting for the most part, unless they're in a special school or a different environment. But there must be a behavior management system in place to anticipate and deal with their behaviors. Research question. Again, I stated this earlier. How will students with behavior disabilities respond to the Token Economy Reward System in an inclusive setting? My rationale, pretty much why I wanted to approach this, is because I'm an EBD teacher here at Northside Elementary, and I'm in direct control of my students' behavior for the most part of the day. I usually try to incorporate my students in the general ed setting 80% of the day. My rationale was when students with learning disabilities are included in a gen ed setting, there must be behavior management system in place to anticipate and deal with misbehavior. The area of focus was within my direct control as an EBD teacher. Overview of the project. Students' behavior data was monitored by behavior tracking sheets, which I have a copy of those uploaded, and I'm going to show you guys here in a little bit. And observation, which pretty much direct observation from myself or teacher assistants. Field notes. The way we set up our behavior tracking sheet, we have two sections of the day, an AM and a PM section. They have 3 goals for each day. Each student is allowed to, or can earn 12 points for the morning session and 12 points for the afternoon session. So, when I say points, I mean tokens. That's the tangible reward that we're going to reinforce positive behavior with throughout the day. Now, location of action research. We're in Harrison County, Northside Elementary, Cynthiana, Kentucky, grades 2 through 4. My subjects were 2 students at each grade level, 2nd through 4th. All male Caucasians, all classified as EBD. Or they're either EBD or other health impairment, OHI. The length of study was 5 weeks for data collection and 2 weeks for data analysis. Literature review. This is basically where I had to investigate and do some background research on my topic and find scholarly resources that back up my claim and my research question. Over the years, various researchers have examined outcomes for students who participate fully in general education classes, finding both positive and negative results. And I touch on that throughout my Master's Action Research project, throughout my paper that I wrote. The ultimate goal of special education, as with all educational programs, is to assist students in becoming productive citizens. Regardless of their level of skill or whether they possess a disability, people cannot be productive if they are unable to function in society or the general education classroom. And basically, that supports inclusion in itself. Inclusion is basically mainstreaming these kids into the general education classroom with their other peers and expecting them to meet the standards that the other students are. Now, along with that, we'll give them the appropriate accommodations and modifications for their day and for their work. Many acknowledge the challenges of teaching in an inclusive classes, but generally they felt it enhanced their overall approach. Data collection. These are the means or the instruments I used to collect my research data. And this, like I said earlier, this was over a 5-week period. Behavior tracking sheets allowed myself or the teacher assistants to record the students' target behaviors daily. each student had a chance to earn or lose 24 tokens each day. 12 tokens for each target behavior daily. This data gave us a quantitative perspective for our data analysis. So it basically gave us numbers that we could compute and find the average or the mean for each day or for each week that the students earned. These numbers that we calculated each day were put into baseline tables for my baseline research that I collected before the research was implemented, and my token economy system data. So basically each week the students' percentages were calculated from the week and plotted in the table in order to see any correlation in behavior day by day and week by week. This data gave us a quantitative, also gave us a quantitative perspective in our data analysis. Self-assessment reflection. This was a bi-weekly self-assessment that students were asked to fill out a self-assessment questionnaire in order to get their own perspective on how they viewed their behavior for the day. Now I'll touch on this later, but some of my results there were skewed and it wasn't very reliable or valid data. Notes, field notes were used to elaborate on student behavior during each day. Field notes were used actually on our behavior tracking sheet. We had a whole section to where we could copy our field notes or comments on why they lost a mark or why they lost a token or why they gained a token. And typically when they lose a token it's before various behaviors, interrupting the class, interrupting the teacher, having verbal or physical outburst. In that case, they're removed from the setting. They're told why they lost their mark, or if they exhibited appropriate behavior, they're told why they earned their marks or why they earned their tokens. Excuse me. Ethics. All students' identities were kept anonymous. This was a very big thing throughout our Master's Action research, that our students' names and their information was kept confidential. Only the participants and administration were included in the data collection and the research process. All students' parents signed a consent form. Environmental challenges for each student. Basically, my students come from very rough upbringings, and sometimes their home environment isn't the best. So that really directly affects, what kind of day they can have. If they have a rough night, they didn't get very much sleep, they may lose, 10 tokens a day. Or, they may be able to have an outburst and recover and gain 24 tokens for that day. It just really depends on the day they have or the night they had before they come to school. That can directly affect their behavior. Other medical diagnoses may skew results for each student. OHI, abuse, that can be physical or verbal, hurt the kids' feelings, and that's really not appropriate for these kids. They need to be loved and they need to be nurtured. And reactive attachment disorder, some of my kids may or may not have that disorder, but that basically prohibits them from, or makes it harder for them to make attachments with significant others, teachers, mothers, fathers, or parent or guardian. Now, baseline data percentage. This is the baseline data that I collected previous to implementing the TES, the Token Economy Reward System. My student named Levi, he was in second grade, he had a 63%, which rounds out to be about 14 to 15 tokens per day. Logan, or during the baseline data, they earned points, not tokens, okay? So they weren't rewarded tangible items for each token they earned. Logan, in the second grade, he had 58%, which is around 12 to 13 points earned per day. Mark, third grader, white, male, Caucasian, that's the same for all these kids up here, earned 42%. That was his average percentage per day and per week. And that's around 10 tokens, or 10 points earned. Jacob was in third grade, he had 58%, which is around 14 to 15 points earned. Caden was in fourth grade, and he earned 58%. He had a 58% average for the week and pretty much per day. Peyton was a fourth grader, he had 71% of his points earned. So by far, Peyton had the best behavior leading up to the baseline, to the TES implementation. Baseline data points averages. Now, earlier, the previous slide I gave you the percentages. That directly correlates with these points that they earned throughout the baseline collection period. Levi, second grade, 15 points. That correlates back to his percentage. Logan, 14 points. Mark, 10 points. Jacob, 15 points. Caden, 14 points. And Peyton, 17 points. Now, keep in mind our target number were 20 tokens, okay, or 20 points. Token economy system data percentages. Our target percentage was 80%. Levi, after the implementation of the token economy reward system, Levi, his behavior, was very appropriate. He responded very well, as did second and fourth grade. Third grade showed an increase, but they failed to meet 80% criteria. Now, Levi, as you can see, he increased exponentially. He increased up to 92%, which rounds out to be about an average of 21 tokens earned. Mark, he increased, I think, 12.5 points, or 12.5 tokens, or 12.5 points in his percentage. Jacob increased to 76%. Caden, fourth grade, increased to 100%. Caden, his student actually had a huge change during his fourth grade transition period right after fall break. There's a new teacher that brought in, and he really responded well to this teacher, and he reacted very well to the token economy reward system. His short-term positive reinforcements that we gave these kids by giving them tokens, rewarding them each morning and each afternoon, they really responded well. They really loved getting the tokens. We made it a really big deal when they reached their goal of 80%. Caden had 100% and Peyton had 93%. So those are all really great numbers, aside from third grade, who didn't actually meet their target percentage. Now this is the token average, which directly correlates back to their percentage. Levi, second grade, had 22. That's 2 points above our target goal here. Logan averaged 20, which met his target goal of 20 tokens. Mark increased, I think, 3 points or 3 tokens from baseline to TES to 13. Jacob had 19, which is just one shy. So even though third grade didn't meet the criteria, didn't meet the 80% target goal or the 20-point target goal or the 20 token target goal, they still increased, which I see that as a positive thing. I don't necessarily view that as negative. They increased their behavior percentages and their tokens earned. Caden in fourth grade, a perfect 24 out of 24. So he did a great job throughout the process. Peyton was 23, just shy of a perfect day or perfect week throughout those 5-week periods. Grade comparisons. Now, after I computed each of the students' point totals from baseline and token totals from token economy reward system, I compared them grade to grade. Now, from baseline data, their average percentage, behavior percentage, was 60%. After the TES implementation, second grade was at an 89%, which increased 29%. That is huge. That's awesome for these kids. Third grade was at 53% during our baseline data. Now, after the implementation of the TES, third grade increased to 65.5. You round it up to 66. That's an increase of 12.5%. So that's still a positive note there. Fourth grade, we're at 65%. After the implementation, during the baseline data, after the implementation of the token economy reward system, they increased 32%. That's awesome for these kids. That's really great for our kids in the EBD unit to be on the upward climb and keep climbing the hill, and they're doing really great. Fourth grade, 97%, increase to 32%. That's huge. That's awesome. They by far responded the best to the token economy system. Self-assessments. Now this is where my data was a little skewed, and I was very skeptical about incorporating this into my paper, the data, because it wasn't very reliable and it wasn't very valid. At this age, and due to these kids' diagnosis, it's very hard for them to internalize their behavior and externalize it. And that means, by externalize, I mean verbally expressing their behavior for each day. At the end of each day, or for each mark that they or each token that they lost, they were explained why they lost that particular mark. Now, that could have been a number of things, but basically it was inappropriate behavior. Now, at the end of each day, the student's behavior tracking sheet was broken down. We computed the averages, and we explained why each student lost their tokens, or why they got a 24 out of 24. We positively reinforced the appropriate days and made sure we addressed the tokens lost for each student. These are two of the questions that I asked them to do. I originally had 6 or 7 questions, but that was just too much for these kids at the end of the day. So I ended up doing bi-weekly self-assessments. Every 2 weeks on Friday, we break down their behavior from week 1 and week 2, and then 3, 4, 5, and week 5. This is the first question. Students were asked to rate their behavior from 1 to 10, 1 being very poor and 10 being excellent. Second question, what is your behavior goal percentage for the week? They did fairly well setting their short-term goals and their behavior percentages for the next week. But according to which day, what type of day they had, according to tokens earned or tokens lost, they weren't really able to put a number. If they had, let's say they had 20 out of 20, they would, or 20 out of 24, they would still pick on the larger scale, the larger end here. They would automatically say 10. I did really great, I earned a star. They weren't able to verbally say that it should have been an 8 or 9 because they lost 4 tokens. Now, 2nd and 3rd grade struggled with this first question here. But I kind of expected that. Once I took a few of the questions out, and after the first bi-weekly self-assessment, I noticed that this wasn't going to be very reliable for me. And what is your behavior goal percentage for the next week? The students were actually able, they knew their target goal was 80% or 20 tokens. So they were able to set that short-term goal, which I think helped them in their short-term goals built up to the long-term goal, which was meeting their 80% criteria at the end of the TES data implementation. Now, as I said earlier, self-assessments were used to compare each student's perception towards the implementation of the token economy reward system at each grade level. Discussion, interpretation. Before I move on, I'm going to take a couple seconds here. I'm going to upload my 2 data tables to give you guys a more visual aid on why, or on how these students' averages and token averages were computed. I apologize, the screen closed out when I opened up my PowerPoint. It should open up really quick to my email way I can access my paper. Should be coming up. Here it is. Okay. Alright, here is my behavior tracking sheet that I spoke about earlier. This is how we recorded each student's behavior for each day, with their name, date, target behaviors, AM and PM sections with comments where we recorded our field notes. First goal was appropriate interactions with peers, on-task behavior, which was complete assignments, and following directions. And then we had parent comments. These were carbon copied to where the parents could give us some feedback in what they're doing at home to try and curb their students' behavior. This is my first document, my first piece of data that I used. Basically, it gives the baseline data percentage for points earned across the board, each grade level, second, third, and fourth, and then it gives my average tokens earned with TES. So you can see the drastic increase, for the second and fourth grade, not necessarily the third grade, but they did do very well. I saw the increase in third grade that didn't meet their target percentage, but they still did an awesome job. 7-point increase, 6-point increase for Levi and Logan at the second grade level. 3 token increase at the third grade level for Mark, and 4 token increase for Jacob at the third grade level as well. Caden increased a whole 10 tokens from his 14-point average. Peyton increased 6 tokens from 17 to 23. So that's basically how I broke down my data as a whole for my Master's Action Research project. This next table here gives a day-by-day breakdown for each student during the TES implementation. As you can see, I have second, third, and fourth grade. Here, I give each day's breakdown. If they met their target goal for the week, it's in green. If they didn't, it's in red. Okay? And that goes from week 1, day 1 through 5, 6 through 10, and so on. As I scroll down, you can see that the red slowly starts to dwindle away, which means that these students are meeting their token goal of 20 tokens per day, per week. Down here, I did our 5-week averages in blue. And this, if they're blue, they met 80% or they surpassed it. So I had a 92% here, 85% here, 57% here, 76% here. These two did not meet their target goal, but they did increase, so I see that as a positive. These two increased very well. They went from, 14, 15 points, which is a 50% average, to 100% for Caden and 93% for Peyton. Back to my PowerPoint here. All right, what'd you go from here? Discussion, interpretation.